Okay, so during the 1600s and 17th century, the lute was to undergo several drastic changes from what it had been earlier in the century, or in the earlier centuries, I should say. We're about 150 years now into the history of the lute. First of all, strings were added and set to a descending diatonic scale, which was to be set into the key in which you were playing. So this is a C, B, A. Obviously, I'm going to play a piece in the key of C, right? Now, we can also play pieces up to, we can also play pieces in A minor on the 11th chords. We could play F, all right? So we could go up to one flat, and that's it. Then you start to be tuning, because the B flat is played on a fingered string. Okay, not so on the 13th chords. They're all played over. Anyway, so an even more drastic thing though was a new kind of tuning that had developed in France. And these, I guess we could call it a D minor tuning, because these strings that are retuned are in F, D, A, and then they repeat themselves. F, D, A, again. That's it. Okay? So that with the bass string, I said a moment ago that the bass strings kind of eliminated the necessity for playing bars like I'm playing here. That's a C chord. Okay, you may not recognize a C chord, but trust me, it is. Well, I can do that by playing the bass down here. I can simplify that chord a lot. See what happens? Right? Neat, huh? All right. This new French lute had a total of 11 courses, but looked pretty much the same as it had during the Renaissance. And as a matter of fact, many of the most cherished instruments of this time were older Renaissance instruments that had been refitted with new necks, rebuilt, as it were, with a new neck to accommodate the added number of strings. So, as you would believe, there are very few actual Renaissance lutes surviving. The body type for this one is what's called a Hans Frey. Well, Hans Frey built lutes in the 1500s, yet his instruments were very highly cherished by the French lute players, and that's what Charles Mouton, on the front of your handout there, is playing. And if you look at the front of your piece of paper there. So, and what's interesting about that is that the instrument that Mouton is holding is pretty much the same as I have here. Same dimensions, same style. In other words, it's what we call a Frey body. Some of them are rounder, etc. Charles Mouton was one of the last of the French lutenists, one of the great French lutenists. And it's an interesting picture because, for one thing, his hand looks a little bit more guitar-like, as you can see. The thumb is out. It's not under the same way it was with the Renaissance lute. Also, they played very close to the bridge. They wanted to project a different kind of sound. This French lutenists were extremely important because the style that they played in was picked up by harpsichordists. They were very prestigious. You have no idea. And why were they so important? Because all of the French aristocracy, including the royalty, played the lute. The three important rulers, Cardinal Mazarin, Cardinal Richelieu, and if you've ever read novels of Alexander Dumas, okay, the Three Musketeers, and you know about Cardinal Richelieu, well, they all played lute. They were very good at it. So there were lute players running around the palace of Versailles like flies, okay? And they were all very good and very highly paid. Charles Mouton was one of them. You've played pieces by Robert Bizet, perhaps his famous D minor prelude and Cost, transcribed. He was Louis XIV's guitar teacher, okay? Important guy. So that's where that's about all that. But now, aside from that, aside from the importance of the French in developing style, not only with the lute, but also passing along to harpsichordists like Couperin and all those people. This French lute music is really, even for knowledgeable musicians, and even for lute players, it's a bit hard to take. Listening to this music it's kind of like the experience of someone who speaks no French whatsoever, but yet tries to understand and appreciate classic French drama by someone like Racine or Corneille or something like that. Okay, so it's very difficult music. So for this reason, then, we're going to give France its due for developing this lute, its tuning, and its style, and then we're going to move quickly on to Central Europe, where the music is more understandable. All right? So we're going to begin our demonstration then with an example from the early 1700s by an Austrian lute player by the name of Johann Georg Weichenberger. So anyway, back to Weichenberger. Weichenberger, as far as the French influence is concerned, continued to play and to use dance suites as his main mode of composition, but he wasn't alone in that. Everyone continued to do that through the world, including JS5. The French dance suite, as you probably already know, the core of it was the Allemand, Courant, Sarabande, and Gille. And to that, other optional movements could be added like minuets or arias or passepieds or badinages or chaconnes or prelude at the very beginning of it. And the Baroque dance suite then. Aside though from following the convention of writing these highly stylized dances, Weichenberger really wrote more in what we might call an Italian style than a French style. Meaning his music was very understandable, just as Italian music was very understandable. Not hard to understand it at all because Italian music emphasizes the beauty of melody, cantabile. Italy is the land of song, of opera, okay? So it's easy to appreciate and easy to love it simply because of that. So the piece I'm going to play then is a chaconne, which, as some of you may know, consists of melodies being written over some sort of recurring bass line or some sort of recurring harmonic pattern. Now before I play this piece, I need to say something about ornamentation. Yesterday, toward the end of class, with John Dowland, we talked about graces and divisions. Graces are twiddles or ascendant, that kind of thing, all played with the left hand mainly. Grace notes, you know all about this, right? Divisions, though, are a little bit harder to understand because they're really improvised sections that you do on repeated sections, generally. And they are improvised. You stay with the harmony and so forth, but aside from that, you do almost anything you want to, as long as it's in a convincing style. John Dowland did this, okay? But this was to really continue along into the Baroque period, in some ways, in a much stronger tradition than it had ever existed before. So what I'm saying then is that, especially with Italian-style music, these improvisations were expected, especially in slow movements like sarabands or arias or chaconnes, okay? Now the problem is, as we said yesterday with Dowland, there are hardly any existing models. Everybody talks about it and how it's important to do it, but nobody explains exactly how. I mean, if you really want to get into this, you can check a couple of other sources like Corelli. Corelli's Opus 5, the violin sonatas. They're very plain, very subdued, very straightforward, but he wrote out an improvisation, and it's amazing what all he calls for. It's scary what all he calls for. Okay? Claudio Monteverdi did the same thing with an aria of his opera Orfeo, and that both of those show examples of this. So, but that's kind of, they're rare, all right? So as I said, though, they were expected. Now with this next piece then, I'm not going to try to improvise. It would have taken me 6 months to come up with something to be in the convention, even then I'm not sure it would be. So what I'm doing is I'm using a version, where an improvised repeat has been created by another modern-day player. And this is Tohiko Sato. Maybe some of you have heard his name. Tohiko is kind of the founding father of the lute revival in the 20th century. He was one of the first people to convincingly play a Baroque lute. In the beginning, nobody could play it. All right. So anyway, so this is the improvisations on the repeats are Sato's. So when I play this, it's a bit like being a pianist who's performing a concerto who plays a pre-composed cadenza. You know about those, right? A performer who doesn't have the chops to compose it himself, but the composer didn't compose it. He expects someone to improvise it. So there's usually a third party involved. Well, Tohiko Sato is the third party, you get the point. All right, so on this chaconne, then, it's on the second page. It's only one page of it. There's more. I don't include as much. But what we have is the original part is followed by a part that is shaded in lightly with pencil, okay, before I Xerox it, but hopefully transparent enough that you can still see something. Well, those shaded in parts are the improvisations. That's Tohiko Sato's work, and the first measure and every subsequent unpenciled in bar is the original.